Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. Today on my channel about Norse mythology and language, I'm going to discuss two similar scenes, one in the records of a Roman writer from the 1st century AD, and one from an Old Norse saga written in the 1300s AD. Now, the Roman writer I'm referring to is Tacitus, who in about AD 98 published his Germania, often translated with the title Germany, about the Germanic tribes north of the Roman Empire. Now keep in mind that at the time there was no such thing as a political entity called Germany, nor even really a region that would correspond to something like the modern designation of Germany. Instead, these were loosely affiliated tribes without any greater political organization, probably culturally similar, probably linguistically very similar, but possibly with quite a bit of differences among them too. These Germanic tribes are speaking at the time the linguistic ancestor of the later Germanic languages, such as English, German, and of course the Scandinavian languages. Now, Tacitus is guilty of, if you want to put it that way, what we call interpretatio Romana, which means Roman interpretation, where he is rarely going to use the names of the native or local names of gods. Instead, he's going to translate them with Roman names and conceptions. But in one interesting section in chapter 40, he tells us something about one of the gods of a Germanic group of tribes, which he calls the Longobards. Of course, this tribe will be active in northern Italy many centuries later, and Lombardy will be named for them then. But at the time, Tacitus says, and here I'm going to quote from my recommended translation of Tacitus, which is by Herbert W. Benario. He says, quote, "They worship Nerthus, that is, Mother Earth, in common, and think that she participates in the affairs of men, and is carried in procession among the peoples. On an island of the ocean there is a sacred grove, and in it a consecrated wagon covered by a cloth. Only the priest is permitted to touch it. He perceives that the goddess is present in the shrine and follows her with great reverence as she is drawn along by cows. Soon the carriage and the garments and, if you should wish to believe it, the divinity herself are bathed in an isolated lake. Slaves assist, whom the same lake at once drowns." So we have a goddess somehow associated with probably the fertility of the earth, given that he's associating her with Mother Earth, who is driven around in a consecrated wagon together with a priest. And then once she's done being driven around in this wagon, she's washed by slaves, and the slaves are killed. Now, the name Nerthus, fascinatingly enough, is probably actually the ancestor form of the Old Norse god name Njordr. That yo in the first syllable of Njordr comes from an old e, if followed by a u in the next syllable. So it's a perfect cognate or ancestor form. In fact, because that S might represent a Germanic Z, Germanic Z's become R's in Old Norse. So it's actually exactly what we would expect the ancestor form of Njordr to be. But of course, Njordr is a male god. So was Nerthus his sister? We know that he had a sister because in the Eddas we read that, and specifically in Lokasenna, we read that his son Freyr and his daughter Froya were produced with his sister, who may well have had the same name as he had. Or perhaps Nerthus is a divinity that had, that over time was considered to be different sexes by different groups of Germanic-speaking peoples. We simply don't know, but the name is certainly the same. But what I'm most interested in is that another Vanir god, in this case Njordr's son Freyr, is described also as being driven around the countryside in a wagon in Sweden in a text written 1200 years after Tacitus in Iceland. This text is Ogmundar Þóttir Dits, often translated in English as the story of Ogmund Bash. But the part that people know best today is really not the part about Ogmund Bash. Instead, it's the part about Gunnar, who is driven out of Norway after he is falsely convicted of a murder. And he goes to Sweden, and he takes refuge with a priestess of the god Freyr. Now here I'm going to give you my English translation of some relevant parts of the end of this saga. There were great sacrifices in that time, and Freyr had long been the most worshipped god, and there was a likeness of Freyr that had been enchanted in such a way that the devil spoke with men out of the idol. A young woman, beautiful to look upon, was kept for Freyr's service. It was a superstition of men in the area that Freyr lived in some way, and they thought that he might need to engage in coitus with his wife. All right, so Gunnar takes refuge with the priestess of Freyr, and when she begins driving around the wagon in the countryside, he goes with her. And we read, a little bit of time passed before they left home, and Freyr and his wife sat in the wagon, and their servants went ahead of them. Now at some point, Gunnar has to get out and drive the animals pulling the wagon, and he ends up getting tired or something, and so the idol actually starts fighting him. And of course, this saga is being written by a Christian for a Christian audience, so the idol is portrayed as being possessed by a devil, Fjandi, and Gunnar defeats the devil leaves the idol, and so Gunnar destroys the idol. But then he puts on the clothes that the idol was clad in and goes around impersonating the idol of Freyr. So there we see, after Gunnar starts impersonating them, quote, "They went to feast during the winter. Freyr was always silent with any other people except his wife, and he did not want living things sacrificed for him like before, and he wouldn't receive any sacrifices or offerings except gold or good silver ornaments or other jewels." So in both of these cases, this story by a Roman from about 98, and the story written down in Iceland in the 1300s about an incident in the reign of King Olavur Tryggvason of Norway, so around the year 1000. We have this strikingly similar procession of a wagon that involves a Vanir deity, either Njordur or his sister, whatever exactly the relationship of Njörður to later Njordur is, and Njörður's son, Freyr. That suggests this probably is based on a legitimate ritual that was engaged in by probably more Germanic peoples than just the Norse, since the Longobards are not Scandinavian. And I think that that's an interesting little fragment of something that we can see. We have so little of the beliefs of the Norse left to us, except for their stories, but here we have a tiny, tiny little bit of evidence of a ritual. Of course, we have to keep in mind that the amount of time that separates Tacitus from Olavur Tryggvason, let alone from the writer of this short saga, is immense. And if you consider how much American culture has changed in just 100 years, imagine how much Norse culture could have changed in 900 years, right? We can't put too much stock into Tacitus's accounts simply because he's so removed in time. But when you have this close of an accord of one of his tales with a tale that we actually see in Norse, I think that we can put a little bit of credit into that as something real. All right. Well, I hope that if you enjoy this video that you'll check out my other more than 300 videos about Norse myth and language on this channel. I hope you'll check out my Wanderer's Hávamál, my translation of Hávamál with the Old Norse text and extensive commentary, which is soon to be available from Hackett Publishing. And from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best.